Rise and shine. This is your morning Buzzcast for Friday, March 21st. I'm Austin Karp, fresh off 2 days of soccer content here at the inaugural Business of Soccer Conference in Los Angeles. That was in conjunction with Major League Soccer, CONCACAF, and our sister publication, Leaders in Sport. I'm joined by my colleagues, Irving Mejia Hilario, Chris Smith, and Alex Silverman. Chris, I kind of want to start with you on some news that everybody was talking about on Thursday before the actual panel started about the sale of the Boston Celtics, $6.1 billion. You've been covering the space a lot. Team sales, private equity investment. What did you make of the sale?
All we keep hearing about is how much capital is dying to get into sports. We're seeing it with high net worth individuals, a lot of them coming out of the private equity and finance world, including Bill Chisholm, who just acquired the majority stake in the Celtics, co-founder of private equity firm Symphony Technology Group. And private equity firms themselves, right? He's brought along a minority investor in Sixth Street, which is now one of the biggest institutional investors getting into sports. They already have a stake in the San Antonio Spurs, the control owner of Bay FC and the NWSL, have investments over in European soccer in Barcelona, Real Madrid. And I think that as a result, we're seeing valuations continue to skyrocket despite all the uncertainty, right, in macroeconomic terms, despite all of the potential challenges ahead, that valuations are not flinching. Let's just look at the trajectory, right? Last decade or so. You have the Clippers sell for $2 billion to Steve Ballmer in 2014, and everyone thought that was crazy. Then, nearly a decade later, 2023, the Suns sell to the Ishbias for $4 billion, and everyone thought that was crazy, right? Both of those record transactions, to be clear. Now, just 2 years later, we have another $2 billion jump to a little over $6 billion. And I'm not sure that everyone thinks this is crazy anymore because we're seeing the same across every sport. In the NFL, you had the Broncos go for $4.6 billion in change in 2022. The following year, the Commanders go for $6 billion. In soccer over in Europe, you see Chelsea at a little over $3 billion in 22 to Manchester United being valued in their most recent transaction last year at over $5 billion. Right. And now there's, I'm simplifying a little bit here. There's differences between all of these different teams and their markets. But I think the overall theme here is that we are still on this skyward trajectory. And if you are an owner in a league like MLS, to tie this back here to Soccer United States, you have to be thrilled because you are in a league that still has room to grow. Right. Unlike these other leagues that have been around and are much more mature, MLS is still looking at how they're going to grow, how they're going to continue to expand, how they bring their brands international. And like we've been talking about over the last 2 days at this event, the World Cup's coming next year, right? You have the greatest possible catalyst that this league could ever possibly ask for right on your doorstep. And so if you're talking about valuations, we had Bennett Rosenthal on stage this week. LAFC team was acquired in 2014 for a $110 million expansion fee.
Which seems crazy, absolutely crazy now.
And now is worth, more than 10 times that, right? I mean, probably $1.2, $1.3 billion. This is just the start if you're the MLS.
So it probably creates some stability then in the Major League Soccer ownership ranks because of the things you're talking about, because of the opportunities out there. Alex, would you see anybody maybe looking to get out, or do you think there's going to be some stable ownership here for a few years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you have these valuations that, right now it doesn't really seem like the revenues are there to support some of them. A lot of these teams are losing money on a year-to-year basis or just breaking even. There's only one or two that are turning significant profits on a year-to-year basis. But on the other hand, the asset values keep increasing. So I think as long as you're willing to kind of keep putting in that cash flow in the short term, your investment looks pretty good.
Obviously, a big thing that everybody is watching in sports. Celtics obviously causing a lot of conversations here in LA. But I do want to turn to the content coming out of this Business of Soccer conference. Irving, I want to go to you first. What stood out from day 2 of the event?
Yeah, I think the panel that I covered featuring Dan Beckerman, Alexi Lalas, Ian Ayre, and Carlos Vera had a lot of good takeaways. Obviously, I think soccer is on such a high trajectory right now here in the U.S., specifically because of the World Cup. You're seeing the popularity of it taking off right now. And I think the big discussion that we were having in there was how do you utilize all the superstars that the sport has right now, mainly Messi, of course. And I think the big challenge that Beckerman mentioned up there while he was on stage, president and CEO of the AEG, which owns the Galaxy, was that convincing sponsors about the power of the World Cup maybe isn't that hard, but the MLS is really where you have to tap into some of these guys and convince them that Messi has a lot more sticking power than maybe you might think. Giving fans, I think, a lot more of the behind-the-scenes access with the docu-series, I think, is a big focus point for them. So giving fans, I think, a lot more touch points and ways that they can interact with the sport, I think, is the big thing that they're facing right now as they face the World Cup soon.
I really wish Apple would promote that docuseries on the platform. Like when you log on, I would like to see it have a little more prominence, because if you look at the 25 most watched things on Apple TV these days, it's still not there. It's still not anywhere. You can see Ted Lasso, which hasn't had a fresh episode in years, but I would like to see more work from Apple to promote that.
Well, without going too far down this rabbit hole, only episode 1 is included in MLS Season Pass even, and then episodes 2 through 9 are behind the Apple TV Plus paywall. So yeah, I think that they're making it a little bit difficult on themselves in some ways.
No, that's that inside information from Alex Silverman there. So Alex, I want to ask you, from your perspective, what stood out from day 2 from the content?
I thought day 2 was fantastic. There was a lot of newsy, topical stuff discussed. One thing being the potential for MLS to align its schedule with European soccer going from fall to spring. It's been a controversial topic among teams because you have teams in cold weather markets that are concerned that it will affect their attendance and their...
Yep. Don Garber specifically brought up Minnesota United, and Victor Montagliani brought up the Canadian franchises. It gets slightly cold in Canada, sources tell me.
Yes, that your sources are correct. Yeah, and the people that you had on the panels represented were in warm weather markets. So you had Beckerman and Bennett Rosenthal and Ian Ayer, like we mentioned. All of them seemed pretty supportive of this move. And Don Garber talked a lot about some of the potential upsides of that move as well. But it's just so complicated. And they talked about a lot of the different potential knock-on consequences and things that need to be ironed out. And it really makes the most sense to do this next year when, coming out of the World Cup to start the new MLS schedule paradigm coming out of the World Cup.
This is turning an oil tanker. You got to start now if you're going to do that process.
I mean, you're 14 months away, essentially, if you're going to do it. Next month's board meeting in Chicago is going to be, I think, really pivotal to see if they're able to do it on this timeline that, would be really ideal for them to do it. So I thought that was really interesting to hear some perspectives on that yesterday. And then we had some heavy hitters from the world of global soccer. FIFA Secretary General Matthias Grafstrom, CONCACAF General Secretary Felipe Moggio, and obviously Don Garber, all talking about their thoughts on readiness for the World Cup. And they all said the right thing, saying that they're optimistic. Grafstrom kind of talking about the positive side of FIFA controlling the event as opposed to there being a local organizing committee. But a lot of what you hear in the hallways and from host cities and people that are familiar with that is that this model has been really difficult on the host cities and that there are some challenges. So it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, ultimately, this event is going to go up and it's going to be a big success for FIFA. But how does it work out for the various communities that are hosting these games? Those were two of the big themes, I thought, in day 2.
Definitely a lot of secretary generals and general secretaries. I think we were just missing a supreme allied commander there on stage that would have really rounded it out and give us a nice third there. Chris, what stood out to you from day 2?
Piggybacking off of Alex's point, I thought it was interesting how many comparisons there were between the 2026 World Cup and the 1994 World Cup, the last one hosted by the United States and the one that led to the creation of Major League Soccer. And I think specifically there was an interesting sub-theme about the growing sophistication of the American soccer fan, right? I mean, Kevin Demoff talked about how you have 3 times as many avid Arsenal fans in the United States as you do in the UK. You had Carlos Vela, right? He talked about how when he signed with LAFC in 2018, he was getting calls from players that he knew internationally asking him, what's the weather like, right? What's it like hanging out? They weren't worried about what he was doing playing soccer. And he mentioned, you go out and you lose 5-0, who cares? You go out, have a nice dinner. No, there's no fans getting on your back about it. By the time he retires last year, that's not the case anymore, right? And 2018 is not that long ago. So we're talking about a pretty quick acceleration here where suddenly you have fans that are creating pressure on their teams and on their players to win games. There's an expectation that this is going to be top-level soccer, and this isn't a retirement community for global soccer players. And I think, an interesting kind of, side, maybe a corollary to that, Victor Montagliani made the point that in response to a question about are we seeing an oversaturation of the U.S. soccer market with all these international tours, all these different cups, all these different tournaments that are being created, that the U.S. soccer fan is now getting sophisticated enough to know the difference. He called a lot of these international tours where we have these top European teams coming over to play preseason games that really don't matter. He referred to them as Instagram games, which I thought was a kind of a funny turn of phrase, but kind of drives home the point that, those games might not matter and the game in your local MLS stadium will. And that U.S. soccer fans, and there were a lot of points that, the U.S. soccer fandom ranges from the hardcore diehard to the very casual who's showing up because they think it's fun to be in a stadium for the afternoon. But more and more of them care more about games that matter. And I think that's going to be a very important point, especially as these teams continue to try to build their fan bases moving forward.
And I don't know that that's been entirely borne out by what we've seen in terms of attendance numbers. I mean, you're seeing, friendly matches, say like in Charlotte last year, Real Madrid versus Chelsea.
That was packed. It was 70, it seemed like 70,000 or
It's a
something.
meaningless game, but I think Don Garber really said it best. He said, what we're seeing now, what the landscape and the saturation looks like now is not necessarily what things are going to look like 5 years from now, like you said, as the fans become more and more sophisticated. So I think there's some optimism there that the people that are putting in the work on the ground in the market are going to be the ones that ultimately win out over the folks that are just kind of parachuting in for the cash grab, for lack of a better word.
Well, 2 days of content. We had so many key stakeholders, so many key issues that we went to. I want to wrap it up with this. Alex, I'm going to start with you. Heading into now the spring and summer of 2025, we're going to be a year or so out from that World Cup. What is one big thing you're paying attention to right now?
Other than the MLS schedule shift that we discussed, I think Club World Cup this summer is going to be somewhat of a litmus test for the level of excitement and the level of readiness operationally that we're going to see for the World Cup next year. I think seeing how that tournament plays out in the 11 cities that it's going to be in is going to be really interesting.
It's huge. I don't want to repeat what happened with Copa America, whether it was in Charlotte or Miami, just two black eyes, we'll say, as far as organization goes. But that was CONMEBOL, obviously completely separate organization.
Right.
Chris, what's one thing you're eyeing?
I think the political side is really interesting to me. We had a lot of panelists kind of dance around this question, but we're obviously seeing a lot of growing tension among the three countries that are hosting this tournament next year, between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. How that political situation continues to play out over the next year plus is going to be, obviously it's interesting in general terms, but it was going to have very real ramifications potentially on how the tournament is run. And I think will be fascinating to see how that impacts the World Cup.
And I got to say, the lone applause line of the day was from Peter Montopoli, who's the tournament leader in Canada. Basically saying, Canadians were polite, but we know in recent times in particular, sometimes we got to have our elbows out, and we are going to show the world that Canada is good for the world. And there are some obvious political undertones to that, and that got a loud round of applause from a largely American audience in the room. So just thought that
it was interesting having all three countries on there, and you could tell that there was, a rivalry going on. It was ahead of the CONCACAF Nations League games where all three national teams were going to be playing. So it was very fun to have all three represented.
You're going to have new administrations in all three of those games.
All right, Irvin, you get the last word. What's something on the business of soccer you are eyeing here over the next 12 to 15 months?
It's funny. Chris mentioned the comparisons to the 1994 World Cup and the fact that it kept coming up. Alexi mentioned that so many years from now, people are going to be looking at 2026 as a thing that all these kids are going to be thinking about. 2026 changed my life for soccer. I'm in the agency world, obviously. And I think for me, what I'm watching is how are those agents going to be utilizing that long-term infrastructure that, the FIFA is going to be building out, these host cities are going to be building out. How are agents going to be utilizing getting their players out in front of the media more? Are they going to be doing more profiles with some of these bigger name companies out there? For the women, how do you market off of the fact that it's been a historically successful team? So I was talking to an agent earlier today who said, look, I don't represent many players that are going to be in the World Cup, but no matter what, this is going to be the tide that raises all boats. So no matter what, he's looking forward to what comes next for his marketing potential, for getting his guys out there in front of the media. That's what I'm going to be watching for.
Yeah, this isn't like the U.S. men's national basketball team where you have the benefit of all these guys were playing in the NBA. You knew who they were, yet they had pre-established stardom, most of them. So developing star power around the men's national team is going to be something that's incredibly important. I totally agree. I want to thank everybody who came out to Los Angeles for this 2-day event. I want to thank our partners, CONCACAF and MLS, as well as our sister company, Leaders in Sport, for helping organize this event. Thank you, of course, to my co-hosts this morning, Alex Silverman, Chris Smith, and Irving Mejia Hilario. Thank you guys for doing this. That is your Morning Buzzcast for Friday, March 21st. I'm Austin Karp. Everybody make good choices out there. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you all again soon.